you've been a resident here?
Well, people always tell me how Baldwin has changed, or they notice that it's changed. The reality is that the world has changed. Uh, Lifestyles have changed. Things like marketing, you used to be able to buy pretty much everything that you needed in Baldwin. We had 2 car dealerships. We had several clothing stores. But I buy a lot of my clothes online. And buying a car is completely different today. So, yeah, Baldwin's changed a lot, but it's only really changed in accordance with the rest of the country and the rest of the world. Well, um, I have children who went to Baldwin 20 years ago or less. And then I have grandchildren who are in elementary school. And again, the world has changed. Just take a simple thing like television. When I was a kid in New York, we had about 4 or 5 television stations. There were parts of the country that only had 1 or 2. So everybody watched the same TV show. Now there's so many different channels, so many different streaming services and everything like that, that the word broadcasting is kind of changing into narrowcasting. And so I think we get diverse messages. When the Beatles hit, this was an atomic bomb culturally. Everybody watched the Ed Sullivan Show. And the parents had to watch the Beatles. I can't tell you the name of the top song and that people are listening to and buying and downloading today. And I certainly can't hum it. But when I was in school, our parents had to listen to rock and roll. They complained about it a lot, but they had to listen to it. Today, I don't have to listen to any music that I don't want to listen to. Maybe that kind of keeps me trapped in a place. On the other hand, maybe it's more outlets for music to reach people that want to hear it. Well, I'm going to tell you the 2 most important things about Baldwin. The 2 greatest gifts that Baldwin has is the Long Island Railroad and the Bay. That hasn't changed, and that's not going to change. This is a wonderful place because to our south, we have the ocean. And when you dip your toe into that water, you could touch any place in the world. And when you get on that platform at the Long Island Railroad, you can be in the center of the world. And that is a great gift to Baldwin. It hasn't changed, and it's not going to change. It's a place where we can get the energy and the diversity, the information, the entertainment, and the influence of New York City. And also, we live on the edge of the wilderness. People don't understand that, but the ocean is the wilderness, and it's the untamed wilderness. We can cut down forests, and we can cross the deserts and everything like that, but the ocean rolls on. Well, my parents lived here when I was born. I stayed here through high school. I went away to college. After college, I lived in Baldwin immediately afterwards, and then I moved around the country for a little bit, and I moved back in. So I'm about 70 years old. I would say that I've lived in Baldwin 58 of those years. Well, I was a founder of the Bruins Boosters Club. I was president of the Baldwin Foundation for Education. I'm sorry, I was a founder of the Baldwin Foundation for Education. I was a longtime member of the Baldwin Educational Assembly, and for 16 years, I was a member of the Board of Education. I started a lifeboat rowing team, the Baldwin Bay Colony Rowers. We won the International Lifeboat Race 6 years in a row. 4 years, we also won the Women's Championship, and I was the coxswain for 2 of those years. So I'm a world's women's champion. Well, you know, I'm a big believer that public education is what makes America great. The idea that we invest our resources in giving everyone an opportunity to become the best that they can be. And it's more than what it does for the individual. It's what it does for us as a society. I want to live among educated people. I want to live among people who are optimistic, who believe that they will be helped, and that by getting that kind of help, they have an obligation to pay it forward and to continue that tradition. So it's a passion that I would say, you know, is just like my passion to keep on breathing. It's self-preservation, it's self-improvement, and I think it's the way everybody should look at it. Well, my most memorable moment was in June 2012 when the Board of Education gave a diploma to Dominic Famularo, who left Baldwin High School without graduating to fight in the Second World War. And he was representative of 25% of the boys in his class who weren't here for graduation. They left school and put themselves in the line of fire because they believed in our country and they wanted to do their part. And the state recognizes that sacrifice and allows boards of education to give diplomas to people that fit into that category. And so Dominic passed away last year, and his children told me that that was one of the nicest things that ever happened to him. And he was a wonderful man. He was a great Baldwinite. He was in the fire department for over 50 years, had every position in the fire department, and it was a way to tell his story to other people in Baldwin, especially young people, that, you know, this is a path that was available to them, and it was also an opportunity for the people of Baldwin to say thank you to him for what he did. And that was definitely my most memorable experience as a board member. Well, the flip answer would be to say I sleep, because I don't get much time to sleep. I am facing the fact that I have to learn how to say no. People ask me to do something, and the first thing I do is check my schedule, and if I'm available, I say yes. But if I have some time, I love to read. I generally read nonfiction. I often will concentrate on a subject and read it, read several books about it to get different points of view on it, and to see what different people's take on a person, on a period, on a technology is. And I think that's a way of self-improvement for myself. One of the things that makes us human is our ability to be analytical. And I think we have to practice that. So that's the way I read. Well, one thing that's changed, of course, is the racial and ethnic composition. When my father grew up here, he was one of very few Jewish kids. And then in around 1960, we got a big influx of people from the city, and they were predominantly Jewish and Italian. Now, there had been Jewish and Italian people in Baldwin previous, as I say, when my father was a kid, but they had a stronger social influence. We got two new congregations, Jewish congregations, and we started to recognize the Jewish holidays in the fall, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. When I was in school, we got our first African American teachers and students. And again, we had Spanish families prior to that, and we had Asian families. One of the things that I'm proudest about is that the demographics of Baldwin has always changed, and it's always changed peacefully. In other communities, there was a lot of unrest and fear on both parts. And I'm sure whenever you move, there is a certain amount of anxiety. It's a big thing to move. Will I be happy there? Will it be good for my family? That's anxiety. That's not the same thing as fear. And there have been some terrible things in some places, cross burnings. We've seen swastikas. We're seeing that now. Graves turned over. That has not been the experience in Baldwin, and that's something I think we should be very proud of. I think it's something that we should be talking about more. For example, Baldwin was one of the very first school districts that recognized Martin Luther King as a school holiday, before the state did, before the federal government did. And at that time, we were a predominantly white school district. But the district recognized how important a figure Martin Luther King was, and how much he represented the best of us and what could be. And so, without a lot of trouble, without a lot of ugliness, we recognize Martin Luther King early, and I don't think that's commonly known, and I don't think that it could ever be too well known, and it should be kind of like the ideal of what we're looking for. Well, I guess, from what I said earlier, you could guess that I was enamored of the water. Um, when I was a kid, almost nobody had a car in high school. Um, you had to be 17 with driver's ed, and the only place you could get driver's ed was in high school, and you couldn't get it until you were a senior. And car insurance was out of reach for most kids. Um, but you could have a boat, and you could go, and it was a way to date. When I was a boy, you hated to take a girl on a date with your parents driving, and nobody ever thought of taking a cab. Uh, so you could go to places that you could walk, or if you had a boat, you could take a girl out in a boat, and we did that. We went water skiing. We went clam digging to make the money to pay for the boats and the gas. And of course, we could go to the beach. We camped out. My grandfather had a house in Gilgo, and we could, when I was like 12 years old, I could take the boat, go out to Gilgo, see my grandfather. It was a wonderful thing, and it was much more common then than it is now, and I think that's one of the things that the kids of Baldwin have missed and are missing. Well, to be honest with you, to call me a student at Baldwin is kind of stretching the definition. Um, I was a I was a I was a talented kid, and I didn't have to work very much to learn enough to pass the test, but I just would not do homework. And what I would describe myself as the 7-footer that didn't want to play basketball. When a teacher sees a student with talent, they think, oh, well, this kid could go to Juilliard. This kid could go to Harvard. And as a teacher, you would take pride in that. But I wasn't interested in doing those things. I was interested in wrestling. And so that's what I studied in school. And while I was talented in academics, I didn't really have a lot of talent as an athlete. And that's what made my accomplishments more powerful to me. As I say, it was the first time that I exceeded my parents' expectations. And that's a very powerful thing because all of our parents have high expectations for us. They have high hopes for us. But there are things that they don't think we can do. And when we can, it's a real powerful thing. And it makes us pass from childhood to adulthood. It makes the parent see the child in a different light. So a lot of people don't understand how important that was, but here's what I say. When I was in college, for a day, I demonstrated that I could solve quadratic equations and understand valences, which is the availability of electrons in chemical reactions. I also could demonstrate that I knew some things about wrestling. Well, none of those things are life skills. But the journey to get through them is pretty much the same. You have to concentrate, you have to get help, you have to learn how to accept help, and of course you have to want to do it. Morally, the idea that I could solve quadratic equations somehow seems more important than the fact that I know how to put on a half Nelson. And I disagree with that. I think that extracurricular activities are just as important as the so-called academic activities, and much harder to gauge. You know, you take a Regents or you take an AP exam, and kind of that's where you are. But for some people, it's a much more important experience. For some people, it's a much more difficult experience. And I think that what we have to do is nurture a passion for self-improvement in everybody and make everybody know that they are going to be a lifelong learner. What's important to know is that you have power over that. You have the ability to decide what kind of lifelong learner you're going to be and what you're going to learn about. Well, I started my involvement in Baldwin schools after I moved back here was I was coaching kid wrestling. And I saw what kid wrestling needed. And so that's when I helped found the Booster Club. And when I was in the Booster Club, the Baldwin Educational Assembly asked me to nominate some people to serve on their committees. So I always figure that you have to lead by example, and so I asked some people to serve, and I decided that I was going to serve myself. When I got on that, I found out more about how the district worked. And when my mentor, Tom Carroll, resigned, there was an opening on the board, and it was going to be a seat for 1 year. And I thought, that's great. That's like an audition. I could do it for a year and see if it worked for me and my family. And the community could see if I worked for them. And there were 11 candidates. And it was, all elections are unique, but it was a funny one. And my favorite part of it is I got interviewed by Newsday, and they called up, and the guy said, well, there's 11 candidates. What do you think your chances are? And I said, I'm going to win. Well, wouldn't any candidate say that? You know, I mean, wouldn't you expect to win? And then he said, well, what's your strategy for the campaign? Well, if I had a strategy, would it be good for me to tell it to the Newsday so that all of my competitors would know? I said, I'm just going to ask my friends to vote for me. And he was like unbelieving, and he said, really? And I said, absolutely. He said, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a truck driver. Well, when they wrote the story of Baldwin, I got half the space in the article. And in Baldwin, there's a truck driver who thinks he's going to win an election he's never run before simply by asking his friends to vote for him. Well, you know, Mr. Trump was elected because the media pushed him so much, and he complained about the media. So I had the best prop of all. I held up Newsday and I said, well, Newsday tells you not to vote for me, which of course made a lot of people vote for me.
So how do you think that the Baldwin community needs to improve?
Well, you know, we are more ethnically diverse. That's critical, because that's the only time that we're isolated and segregated. And ignorance is extremely dangerous. And You know, the universal fear is the fear of the unknown. So, you know, just in one single thing, that's better. And important in Baldwin in particular. You know, some communities haven't changed as much as we have. I would say some communities haven't improved as much as we have. You know, the roads are better. The bay's not as good. We used to be able to clam right out. You know, once you got off the land, you could start digging clams. Now you can't. You can't even dig them for bait. You used to be able to make a living, feed a family, buy a house, have a car by working in the bay. There aren't really anybody that can do that anymore. But our schools are great. We've kept pace. This TV studio that we have here is just another example of it. The smart classrooms that we're getting. And, you know, the fact that a couple of years ago we resized the district. You know, painful decision, but we closed 2 elementary schools, and I think that made the education for the kids better. And it was a better use of the resources. So my dad grew up in Baldwin. He graduated in 1934. He skipped a grade, so he should have graduated in 35. I graduated in 65, and one of my sons graduated in 95. So I'm right in the middle of 3 boyhoods in Baldwin. And I say that my boyhood in Baldwin was much closer to my father's than my son's was to mine. And now that's 20 years ago. And my grandchildren's childhood in Baldwin will be a lot different. But it's more about the world being different than Baldwin being different.